Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. I'm Randall Carlisle, and I am pleased to announce a new co-host, a permanent co-host, unless you do a rotten job today, Rachel. Uh, Rachel Santizo. Rachel is a rock star in the recovery community. Maybe you could just give us like a 30-second brief history of your misdeeds and your good deeds.
So I used to live under cars, and now I am 8.5 years sober, and I'm really honored to be here with you, Randall.
That was a lot quicker than 30 seconds. You were a recovering addict, correct?
Yes.
And that's why, and you were down on the block, and that's why you were living under cars.
Exactly. Yeah.
If we wouldn't have explained that, it would have sounded pretty weird saying I used to live under cars, you know.
I was trying to make it quick.
Did you have any favorite model car you like to sleep under?
Ooh, I think the dirtier, the better, because I felt like they wouldn't run. And so I like the rundown dirty cars.
Okay, Rachel is in recovery. I'm in recovery too. I was a functional alcoholic for decades during my career as a TV news anchor, and now I work at Odyssey House, and Rachel coincidentally works at Odyssey House as well. We do different jobs, and I should tell you, we have a new studio ready to go, but until the pandemic is over, we've got to do it like this. So this is our, believe it or not, Rachel, our 64th Odyssey House Journal podcast.
Wow, 64 is a good number. I'm excited for today.
We have probably one of the more controversial, probably the most controversial topic we've ever covered. We'll get to that in a sec. I always try to impart one little piece of useless information before we go. Do you have any idea how many photos are posted to Facebook every single minute in the world?
I'm gonna guess 500,000.
Well, that's a little high, but 147,000 photos every single minute.
Yeah, that's too many.
Our podcast is available on, what's it on? Spotify, iTunes, YouTube. All you got to do is go to Google and Google Odyssey House Journals, and it'll tell you where you can either watch it or listen to it. And speaking of YouTube, users upload 500 hours of video every single minute from YouTube.
Wow, that's incredible. And really, we're on Facebook too. And so we're a part of that 147,000.
There you go. There you go. This podcast is aimed at talking about everything dealing with recovery and addiction. And so our guest today is, and I said it's going to be controversial. You saw the mystery man with his name up there on the screen. Tim, you can turn on your audio and your video if you want. Tim Keffer, he is case manager for Salt Lake City Police Department. He works at the Community Connection Center, specifically with people, and this is why it's controversial, on the sex offender registry. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So,
how are you guys doing?
Well, we're doing great. We're doing great. You and I have had several conversations in the past, which is why I wanted to get you on. If you're on the sex offender registry and you've got a substance use problem, where can you go for help?
Well, right now, currently, you can do outpatient treatment, or you can go to detox, or try to do it by yourself.
What about residential treatment?
We get about, I'd say, 1% into residential treatment. And that's usually if they are willing to go 3 or 4 hours away.
So, and in total honesty, Odyssey House will not accept, generally will not accept people on the sex offender registry. Do you know the reason for that, Rachel?
I do. So my take on it is one that I personally have been a victim from being molested as a child. And so I think there's a lot of trauma, right? And that's why we go into treatment. And so if you're in treatment with someone that has done trauma like that, it is really hard to work through those things. And so there's no way that I could work through. And I think that there's a lot of individuals, whether if they're male or female, that have been through sexual trauma. And I think that's can be a really big reason on why people use. And so it does cause conflict. And also another thing is that people that come, there's just a world that's created around sex offenders. If you have that name, there's a huge stigma, and there's huge barriers created just off that title alone. And so people are coming in from being incarcerated. That is just absolutely two worlds that do not mix well together. And that is just the way that it is.
So, Tim, does that mean that people on the sex offender registry with an addiction issue don't need help?
Well, actually, the reason that I try to get everybody into substance abuse treatment or residential treatment if needed is just to lower victimization and to better their lives. A fair amount of these guys were under the influence, they were drinking, they were high whenever the offense happened. And I believe that if they are still high, still using, then that chance of victimizing someone else goes up.
So let's do some definition here. I mean, there's varying degrees of sex offenders, and in my opinion, I mean, everybody thinks a sex offender who's a pedophile who molested a kid is terrible, okay? But there are varying degrees, like if you're 19 years old and you have sex with a 16-year-old, you go on the registry if you're convicted of statutory rape, right?
Yeah.
And
so, and that's actually one of the issues with the registry, and the information allowed is we have everybody from people that were charged with 4 counts of lewdness, being homeless, to, you know, your most violent predators.
And the lewdness could be just being caught peeing on the street or something, right?
Or changing on the street because they're living on the streets. It could also mean that they were high, running down the street naked 4 times. It really varies on the charge. And because whenever the registry first came out, everybody that was on it, or I would say the vast majority of people that were on it, really needed to be on it. And if you was on it, you know, you earned it. The umbrella has widened so far now that, you know, you have people with lewdness, you know, sexual misconduct, just a vast of charges. And the way that people are charged changes from state to state.
And so if you're on the registry for whatever reason, how long are you on, and how does that affect stuff like employment or finding a place to live or anything like that? So
whenever you're on the registry in Utah, we have a 10-year and a lifetime. And there's a few charges. I think there's 5 charges that if you have that exact charge, you can get off 5 years early. If you've never been found in non-compliance, you completed everything that's been asked of you. But the rest, if you're on a lifetime, you're on a lifetime registry.
So if you're on the sex offender registry, how long are you on it for, and how does it affect your life, Tim?
So in Utah, you will be on it for either 10 years or for life. And the 10 years stops, or the 10 years starts as soon as you finish your probation or parole. So if you're on probation or parole for 5 or 10 years, as soon as that ends, then that's whenever the registry time starts.
And how does it affect life?
So as far as having a job, we have to check employment. So you will have the sex offender registry calling and verifying that you actually work where you say you work. If you are going to school, we will call and verify that you're going to school. And as far as housing, it causes a real issue, just because, you know, whenever you register your address, a lot of the landlords and so forth don't want their address popping up whenever somebody does a registry search.
So, and I should point out, I mean, obviously it's a horrible crime to commit, especially when you're talking about molesting kids and things like that, or rape or things like that. But
Absolutely.
there are varying degrees, and we're not right now talking about sympathy for these people as much as it is there are people on the registry who need help in treatment centers and can't get in. The reason you and I talked the first time is you called me and you were trying to get somebody on the registry into Odyssey House, and we couldn't do it. And do you run
Yeah.
into that all the time?
Oh, I run in that constantly. That's why most of the time I have to send people 3 to 4 hours out of town in order to get any kind of residential treatment.
And there's definitely resources lacked. And so I think that that's something that we're like trying to address as well, because everybody needs somewhere to go, right? And I go into Lone Peak and I teach communication to the sex offenders in there. And when they're being released, they can't be released without an address. And there's just no options for them or places or spaces for them to go. And so it's like, how can we create like opportunity for individuals that are on there that maybe have the lesser charges?
Yeah. Well, and the way that I look at it is these are the tools that I have to work with. They've gone in, they've done their time, they have done the therapy that they were assigned to do while in prison. And if I had different tools to use to lower victimization and, you know, get people on the right track, I would use them. But right now, this is what I have to use. And if they want to stop using, then, you know, and, you know, it's apparent that if they're not using, they're not going to have those, or those thoughts are going to go down. It's, you know, the substance isn't going to make that thought okay. So I would much rather get them in a residential treatment than say, hey, there's just no help for you until they end up going back to prison.
So I mean, I don't mean to sound sensational, but I used to work in TV news, so I do sound sensational. There's actually a fairly large group of sex offenders who are addicted to some kind of substance, who are out on the street and can't find treatment even if they want it.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And also with a fair amount of these guys, I won't say all of them, but you know, a fair amount of them are also using because of a fair amount of trauma, which I'm not saying makes it okay for what they did, but they're also going through other issues. And like I said, whenever I get an individual housed, get them into some kind of therapy, they have something to lose, you know, they have a reason to keep being successful, to the point where, you know, just like in the last couple of months, I've had a few guys come and say, hey, I feel like reoffending and I don't want to do this. And so we were able to get them into therapy, start monitoring them a little bit more. They were checking in with us all the time. We're able to go in, get their medications checked. And right now we don't have another victim. We just had somebody who came and said, hey, I need help. I don't want to do this, and was able to get the help.
Do you see a lot? So this is just what I've heard, is that a lot of people that do these offenses, it's been done to them.
It's not verified. I mean, from state to state, from study to study says, you know, this is how many people were offended against themselves. As far as whenever I was working with youth offenders, the number one thing that they had in common was they witnessed domestic violence.
Wow, that's an incredible statistic.
So is there an answer? Is there a solution to this? I mean, you can, you know, from say Odyssey or any treatment center standpoint, if we were to, first of all, Rachel described pretty well the problems with putting convicted sex offenders into a residential setting with people who have been the victim of sex offenders. Okay, there's a problem there. So So, and then another problem is if you try to find a place just to put sex offenders, you've got the not in my backyard kind of issue. I mean, so is there a solution to this?
Well, maybe just, I think that the more education that we get out to people, that in all the treatment centers that I've ever been into, they have 24-hour staff. They have monitoring, you know, they check up on the clients even throughout the night. As far as the community, I think them being in these facilities, we know where they're at, they're being monitored. The community isn't having to pay extra dollars to have the offenders monitored 24 hours a day, and they're getting the therapy that they need to lower victimization. The same with housing. That's why I house so many guys, is if we know where they're at, if they do something wrong, we can usually stop them between, hopefully at the, you know, I mean, of course we don't want any victims, but if we know where they live, we can stop it at 1 to 5 instead of 20 to 30, if it is that person. You know what I mean?
It seems so simple to me that we just need to come up with a building and resources and coping and everything else that people have dealt with trauma in their life, right? Or have made wrong decisions. It seems like we just need a space and create this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the, you know, the more people that get into treatment, the more people that are, especially treatment that also holds accountability in high regards, that will go right along with the sex offender treatment that they already received, so that they're constantly hearing the same thing. I think it's just going to be super beneficial in the long run.
It's just
What
so
about,
because it's the same feelings as me being in recovery, like losing custody of my kids, things like that. Like I was not a good person or making right decisions, and that's what I needed. You said that having somewhere to go to say, hey, I feel like I'm gonna use again, right? Or I'm gonna reoffend. It seems kind of like the same concepts in a sense. Different offenses, but same concepts.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's all thinking errors. It's all, you know, most of these are not just impulse, they're kind of thought out. And then whenever you add substance to it that makes that answer okay, you know, you start getting victims. Whenever I worked at the last organization that I worked for, I worked there for 13 years. We housed sex offenders, and we didn't really care about the background. We did, you know, their offense. We knew that they were an offense. We treated everybody the same. And just at that facility, in the 13 years that we had people there that came from the streets, some of them were the city's highest utilizers of emergency services. They had severe persistent mental illnesses. And the entire time that they lived at the facility, we never had an issue. Never had anybody return back to prison for a sexual offense while taking in-case management and living in these places. I mean, knock on wood, I'm not saying that we did something different than everybody else, but we had 24-hour staff, we had cameras in the buildings, we had therapists, we had medications, we had people they could talk to. And these people went from living on the streets, going to the ER every day because there was nowhere else for them to go. You know, whenever you're homeless, your anxiety goes up, you know, everything's a crisis, to moving them in, showing them some ports, getting them into therapy. We never had a reoffense on our caseload. And that was over 10 years.
So sort of what you're saying is it's a lot safer if you could get sex offenders into a treatment program than having them be out on the street, perhaps using drugs again.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
But that's not the way the public sees it, though. They say, I don't want to live, I don't want to hear about a group of sex offenders in my neighborhood, and a treatment program may say, we're going to take a lot of heat if we have a specific sex offender program.
Well, and I've been to a few different places, and I've worked at a few different places that worked with sex offenders, and we got the same thing from all the neighbors. But I think once they started realizing that there was already a number of sex offenders already living in their neighborhood, and the fact that we were actually going to be monitoring these guys. And I know at my other job, if one leaves, one of the first things that we do is notify the sex offender registry that that person has left this location. And we just stay in good communication with their probation officers, parole officers, the sex offender registry, and it's worked out.
So if you're on this sex registry, then you basically have like a case manager?
No. So if you're on the sex offender registry, what that requires is a minimum that you have to register twice a year, once on your birth month, anytime in your birth month, and 6 months after. Okay. Anytime, and then we have a thing that we call VEER, and that's Vehicle, Education, Employment, and Residence. Anytime that there is a change to one of those 4 things, you have 3 days to make that change in person at the registry. So if you start a job, quit a job. If you move into a place, move out of a place, if you're, and Utah is one of the places where we'll even register somebody if they're homeless, and we'll check. But as soon as they get kicked out of that area or trespassed out of that area, they have 3 days to come in, and they're really, the majority are really good at it.
What kind of pushback have you gotten from treatment centers when you suggest that we need a program for sex offenders?
Well, a lot of them, what I've noticed is a fair amount of them just don't know what the rules are. They think that they automatically can't, or they think there's a school within a mile of this place, so we're not allowed to do that. And that's not the case. If they're on probation or parole with like AP&P, AP&P can say you're not going to live this close to a school or playground or something. But once they're off probation, Utah doesn't have any restrictions on where they live, which is good and bad. But I mean, if they live right next to a school, they can live there legally. If the umbrella blows off their deck and it goes onto that property and they go to get it, they're out of compliance for being in a protected area if they have a victim under a certain age.
So if in an ideal world, what would be your solution?
Well, I think that getting units set up to work with sex offenders is just going to benefit the community as far as residential treatment. Not to mention whenever they do complete residential treatment, not only whenever I go to a landlord and try to house them to make sure that they don't fall back into that circle, it's really nice to say, look, they've already completed the treatment that they're required to for their sexual offense, which already makes them, 30% more likely to be more successful than somebody who didn't. But they've also gone an extra step. They've made it through this tough, straight up accountability, kind of in your face treatment center. They've been able to take accountability for those actions. Now they're ready to move on to the next step. And, as long as they're bettering their lives or trying to better their lives, I just look at that as, there's a few of them that really want to give back to their victims. Some of them have been, well, one guy in particular had been, I know for a fact I worked with him for 17 years, but he had been a victim for years. And it took us about 15 years to get him clean and sober. He relapsed 1,000 times, couldn't get in any treatment centers, would go to detox, wasn't residential treatment, so he was right back out in it. But eventually after 15 years, we're able to get him to a place where he was on Suboxone, was not using, was taking his meds the way he was supposed to, and he wanted to start giving back. That's all he wanted to do, was start trying to find ways of giving back to say, I'm not going to do this again. So he was able to actually talk to other offenders, talk to people going down that path and say, don't be like me. and mean it. You know, he's been homeless for 20 years because of this. And I mean, being homeless didn't help him.
The general public perception, I think, is this is a disgusting crime. These people don't deserve anything, and there is no public empathy. So you're fighting an uphill battle, really.
Yeah. Where all I'm at the end of the day, our main goal is to lower victimization. Is just to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That's why there's a registry so that we can monitor people, to hold them accountable, to keep checking. This is just another tool in lowering victimization. Not to mention, I also have a belief that nobody deserves to be homeless. I mean, I've never seen homelessness solve anybody's problem. I've never seen homelessness stop a sex offense. I've never seen somebody get kicked out of where they're living because of drugs and homelessness help them in their recovery. I've never seen any of that. So,
What it boils down to is you may not have compassion for a sex offender, but in the long run, the communities, in my opinion, is going to be safer if they do have a place to get treatment. Because Rachel and I am an alcoholic, and she's an addict, and I can speak for myself that I did stupid, wrong things when I was high that I don't do when I'm sober. Would you agree with that, Rach?
Absolutely. I mean, so as we keep talking about this, it's hard for me not to have this like space in my heart. Even though I come from that trauma, there's still a space in my heart because I needed someone to have a space in their heart for me, right? And I needed to have resources. And so I think that everyone does. And I love how you said, Tim, how you talked about the homelessness. You're absolutely right. Like, thank you for bringing that point up. I can't help but wonder, and to piggyback off Randall, like it takes a special person, right, to not have judgment and to really see past things and to really show up and say, how can we create change? Like, you matter, right? And so how did that become for you, Tim? Like, you're doing some incredible work, and I know that I appreciate it. Where did that space come from for you?
So, I don't know. So before I've worked with sex offenders in different aspects for about 20 years, in one way or another, either having to work with them or in one way having to deal with it. The last place I worked, my job was to house people that had a severe and persistent mental illness that were homeless, get them housed. Well, we started housing these guys, and next thing I know, I had this entire group of guys that hadn't been housed in 5 years. And then whenever you start talking to people and you're like, why isn't this person housed? Why isn't this person housed? And it's because they're on the registry. And I was like, well, but my job was to house the homeless. It didn't say house the homeless unless they have this. It didn't say get them clean and sober first. It didn't say take care. It just said house them. So I started housing them. And then after a while, people started asking questions. And my guys weren't going back to jail. They weren't being found in noncompliance. And we knew where they were at. Their quality of life went up. So victimization went down. Like, there was no talk of it. Our guys weren't going back to jail. They weren't taking up room in an emergency room because there was no other avenues for them to go whenever it was cold than to try and overdose and go to the hospital.
If someone is on the registry, right, or if we come across somebody or somebody is on the registry, like what suggestions would you give, or what advice would you give, or what would you tell them so that they have an option?
So if you come across somebody on the registry and you're trying to find them services, right now that number's kind of been me, just because my job is to keep people in compliance. If they're having problems with being in compliance, then I meet with them and try to take away that reason. If the reason that they're being non-compliant is substance abuse, then I try to get them into as much treatment as I can. If it's housing, I get them housed. If it's, and I think over the 3 years, I think it has a little bit over 200.
Wow.
I mean, it's more than that, but it's about 200. And the ones that are housed are not in non-compliance. They're not committing other crimes. They're checking in. They finally have a place, and you know, some of them have a place, and now they're working on substance abuse. They're working on the things that they couldn't work on while they were on the streets.
We're out of time. If people want to get a hold of you, you work at the Community Connection Center, which is on 5th West at 2nd South, right?
So right now I am at the sex offender registry.
Oh,
So if they're on the registry in Salt Lake, it's really easy to find me.
and you will
Do
do your best to help.
I'll do my best to help, but it's an up road. It is definitely a fight.
And you keep bugging people like us to open up our doors to somebody on the registry for treatment, right?
It's gonna keep happening. I'm not gonna lie.
Well,
You'll
you're
probably
fighting.
get a couple calls from me this week.
You're fighting a good fight, and again, to me, it's not an issue of saying, oh, it's okay if you're on the sex offenders registry. It's the reality of the fact that you will get out of prison or jail or whatever at some point, and you are going to have to try to live your life, and the streets are safer if you're doing it sober as opposed to high. I mean, is that true?
Yeah. Well, and even once you move into a place, it's better to have your neighbor be clean and sober with all this treatment behind them than with nothing. Like, give them some tools to be successful.
Rachel, a final thought before we go?
Yeah, so coming from the individual that's been through the trauma, myself, like I can't help but hope that we do come up with a solution for these individuals, because human beings are human beings, right? And it is a lot safer, and they deserve like resources as well. And I don't know, deserves kind of like a strong word, but everybody deserves like a space. And if we provide that space, then it would be better for our community, right? And Tim, like, you're incredible. Like, thank you for the work that you're doing and the different perspectives you brought into my life just in this half an hour. So thank you.
Rach, it's been great having you as a co-host. I think we'll hire you for another show, okay?
Thank you. I'm excited.
This is our 64th Odyssey House Journals podcast. Awesome. And as I said, you can just Google Odyssey House Journals podcast, and it'll tell you where you can listen to them or find them to watch them. And even though we're obviously with a name, we're sort of pushing Odyssey House, but because it's Odyssey House Journals. But if you'd like any information on treatment, just call our admissions office at 801-322-3222. And we will be back again next week with Rachel, not with Tim. Tim will still be calling treatment centers saying, please let this person in. So thank you for watching. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks.